got a couple books. He's got one book called 0 to 60 Million. And I bought it about 5 or 6. I bought it right as my company had hit the bricks, hit the wall, whatever you want to call it. I bought it, then I read it, and it didn't click with me. Then I was looking over my books, and I went, oh yeah, I remember buying that book. And I read it, and it just clicked. And I immediately got on because I do this, right? I was like, hey, can we talk? And we started talking. And he's come into my company. He's helped us. He's guided us. And we've got a long way to go, but he's an integral part of that. And then he's got another book called A Garage Full of Ferraris. Right? Yeah. And it's not about Ferraris. I'll let him talk about that. But Keith, thank you. I'm going to turn the time over to you, and appreciate you being here.
Okay. Thank you, Tab. Had a slide presentation. Not sure how to hook into that. There we go. And then can somebody do I just click on it to advance the slides? Can somebody tell me?
Is somebody telling them? They gave you your instructions in your chat. I heard that from on high.
Gave me my instruction. Oh, holy cow. Okay. Hang on just a second.
Take your time. As you can tell, I'm going to talk more about him. As you can tell from the background, he played football. As he talked to my son, who also played football, there's a bonding moment between them, and it was pretty awesome. So, I don't know if he's going to talk about football, but I love it when he talks about football.
I'm seeing stuff about my password and everything else. I'm not sure where it says how to actually advance the slides.
Can we do it for him, or is that?
It's got to be something fairly easy.
Yeah, take your time. Our last speaker canceled, so you can have his 40 minutes too.
They can advance the slides for you.
Okay, they're going to advance your slides for you. You just have to say next slide, or something like that.
Okay, we'll take a shot at it. Well, because Tab's kind of led into it, I'll explain this, my title to my slides. And Tab said, I've spent probably 55 years on a football field between playing, refereeing football, coaching football, and being a sports photographer. In fact, all the pictures you'll see tonight, all of it except maybe 2 or 3 are my pictures. All the sports pictures are pictures I've taken at games. But the reason I named my presentation Dancing in the End Zone is because I felt winning big in sales and winning big contracts, there's a similar feeling that was generated like when you score a touchdown in football and you're dancing in the end zone. And you'll see that as I go through some of the examples tonight. And what I'm going to share with you this evening are the lessons I learned through the process of generating over $200 million in services revenue for some of the companies I work for. And in each of these cases I'm going to share, I went against accepted practices, and I went in defiance of my company's stated sales processes to get to the end result. And even though I was in violation of those processes and against what they believed I should be doing, nobody complained about the results at the end. And it wasn't rocket science. So let's have that first slide. I want to give you a little bit of my background, because that's kind of sets the stage for what I'm going to talk about this evening. I spent the early part of my career in Texas during the oil boom. And during that time, work literally walked in the door. projects were ours to lose. And we used to joke about having to give bonuses to the receptionist, the lady that answered the phone, because she was the first person that our customers contacted. And so we attributed our success to her. But the problem with that situation is we really weren't learning to sell. And that was a big problem because we were focused more on filling orders than we were selling. We were focused more on managing our resources and making sure we had the right people to deliver those services rather than really selling. And we were focused more on spending money rather than making it. Okay, next slide. So that was a big problem. Going on to the next one. And the problem, I mean, in not learning how to sell is we weren't taking the time to learn what was really driving the demand for our product or our services. And we really didn't know the value we were delivering. Okay, move on to the next one. So you all know what's involved in selling, and we weren't getting into the in-depth needs analysis that you normally do or normally have to do in a normal selling situation. Like I said, companies were coming to us and saying, come on in. And we didn't have to be creative or innovative. I mean, I compare it to being like the only woman on a submarine or the only man in an all-girl dormitory. There wasn't really a lot of creation that was needed. But then the oil boom ended, and I had to learn to sell. And to compound the problem, I got shipped off to the UK. So I leave Texas, I'm in the UK. I'm in a totally different environment, strange environment, and now I'm under pressure to sell. And what changed when I got there, things were much slower pace. They were slower pace not just because it wasn't the oil boom anymore, but that was a culture in the UK. There didn't seem to be a sense of urgency. And I best describe selling and the way they did business as old school. So it was quite a change. But it was a great opportunity. I was working for a large accounting firm. We had very prestigious clients. There's a list of our clients. And we had very strong relationships with those clients. So, it was a perfect situation, right? You would think so. Next slide. Well, it wasn't quite as perfect as you imagine. One of the things I found out is when I was in Texas and I had to get an appointment with a client or a prospect, I could call them up and I'd have an appointment within a week, maybe 2 at the outset. Didn't work that way in the UK. You called somebody up or you went to an audit partner and they'd set a meeting 6 weeks out, maybe sometimes 2 months out. So there was a lot of dead time in between. And then there was a problem of my selling skills, which I hadn't quite developed. And then I found out that those relationships that the audit partners had with all those big clients, they weren't really the right relationships for what I was selling, the services I was selling. It was IT services. And then to compound it all, I'd been there for about 2 or 3 months. And audit partner called me up and he says, hey, we've got this client from Dublin is here today. And would you mind having lunch with him? I said, no, I'd love to have lunch with him. And his name was Patrick O'Shaughnessy. He didn't look like that, but that was his name. Patrick O'Shaughnessy. He was from Dublin. So we had lunch, and at the end of lunch, they had a couple of Irish whiskeys. And at the end of those Irish whiskeys, he turns to me and he says, so tell me, Keith, how do you find working with the British? Well, I kind of hummed and hawed. I didn't really have an answer. So he comes back and he laughs and he says, most Americans find it easy to work with the Japanese than they do with the British. And that kind of defined the struggle I was having. Next slide. So before long, management in the UK, they sent me the head of the marketing department. And we put together a great marketing plan. We basically said we were going to conduct a survey of the oil and gas industry in the UK. We were going to publish an article based on those survey results. We actually published it in the Financial Times. And they started to arrange for me to go on a speaking tour throughout Europe to talk about the oil and gas industry. And so all of that was put in place. And the next step was to sit back and wait for the phone to ring. And the phone did ring. But unfortunately, it wasn't what we were expecting. The people on the other end of the phones weren't exactly what we were expecting. So I had to come up with a different strategy. I had to think a little bit differently. So I came up with 3 approaches: innovative thinking, know your value, and building relationships. And I'm going to get into each of those in detail. And what was the motivation behind coming up with a new strategy? I guess you'd have to say it was desperation. I was between a rock and a hard place. So innovative thinking, what's that all about? Fairly simply, it's just challenge your conventional thinking. Consider the other's perspectives and to be open to what comes your way. Pretty easy. Know your value. Look at the value from the customer's perspective. Quantify the components of that value, and then realize it's not always what you think it is. And finally, building relationships. Build relationships with people internal. The person in the office next to you may have a relationship with somebody that could be the beginning of a big sale. But also look at external relationships. People in different companies, people that may be competitors as well. And I'll talk about that specifically. And in building those relationships, I think we all know this, don't burn bridges. I've worked for 3 or 4 different firms, and inevitably I ended up working with people that were my customers or my competition down the line that I used to work with. And I was so thankful that I never burned those bridges. Next slide, back in the UK. So I said those calls weren't from the people we expected. The calls actually were coming in from software and hardware vendors. They wanted to partner with us. They wanted to partner with me. And they knew their technology very, very well, but they didn't know the business problem. They didn't understand the oil and gas business like we did. Well, partnering with the competition was not necessarily well accepted. It was almost treasonous. But as it turns out, those other companies, they had relationships with big companies, and they saw value in what we provided that we didn't see in ourselves. And it was through those discussions that we figured that out. So they started taking me on trips to visit some of those big clients. In fact, they invited me to some very prestigious events. And the biggest one was they invited me to a rugby match at Twickenham. And the rugby match in the UK was preceded by a luncheon. But when we actually got inside the stadium, I was sitting next to the managing director of the largest gas company in the world. And I had about 2 hours sitting next to him. During that process, I discovered the value that I didn't realize we have, and it was the understanding and knowledge I had about the U.S. gas industry and that my firm had about the U.S. gas industry. What I didn't realize is that this company was getting ready to revamp their whole systems, copying what the U.S. had done over the previous 10 years. And we knew what they'd done. So we were asked to bid on a project. And guess what? We won it. The value of that project at that time was about $60 million. In today's money, that was about $112 million. So I'm going to fast forward to the next chapter of my career. I'm back in Houston. I'm a practice leader of another consulting firm. When I took over the practice, I was given responsibility for a large project with a large oil field services company. Click on this, you'll see that you may know who that oil field services company was because the CEO was a guy named Dick Cheney. Well, I inherited this project, and we had won the project 2 years earlier. We'd won it in competition with our client's auditors. We were 2 years into a 3-year project. The project was on schedule. Relationships were good. Everything was going well. And then our client hired the audit partner to be their chief financial officer. So the fox was in the hen house. And if you didn't pick up on those things, 2 years previous, we'd won the project from the auditors. And now that audit partner was the chief financial officer of the company. So what did he do? First thing, punted us. He punted us in that he had immediately assigned his former firm to be responsible for the project. My management freaked out. And they immediately decided that they were going to start pulling the people off the project. They figured that we'd be canceled anyway, and they wanted to pull our people off the project. And I thought, no, wait a minute. This is a disaster ready to happen. And a disaster from two perspectives. First of all, I didn't think there was any way we could get that project done if my management started pulling the people. And that wasn't going to make the client very happy. And if we made that client unhappy, we were going to aggravate one of the biggest players in the industry. And that was not a smart thing to do. So I had to think about, make sure we had the values continuing to be there. I had to come up with some innovative thinking and relationships. And as it turned out, I'd met the consulting partner a couple of years earlier. I knew him, so I immediately got on the phone to him. And I said, hey, when are we going to meet and start figuring out how we're going to work together? Took him totally by surprise. He didn't know what to say. And he said, can I call you back? 15 minutes later, he called me back and said, yes, let's set up a meeting. And in that 15 minutes, he'd called that CFO. And he had said, we've got to work with these guys. And not only did it work, those combined teams work well, our revenue actually increased. Rather than having to pull people off that project, we added people to the project and our revenue increased. And most importantly, the client was absolutely delighted that I had teamed up with our competitor to deliver that project for them on time, on budget. Now let's advance forward, and I'm going to apply these same concepts to a software company. I'm going to stop right there before we advance the slides any further. I was given an opportunity a few years after that to go to work for a software company, very prestigious software company working in the oil and gas industry. They wanted to bring me on to build their consulting services around their software product. Great opportunity. I was going to be reporting to the senior vice president of sales and services. And he and the president had decided they had to build their services to really grow the company. And that was what I was interviewing for. But it was off to a rocky start. One of the first people I had to interview, other than the two people that wanted to hire me, was the vice president of sales for North America. Had the strangest interview I think I'd ever had, because within 2 minutes after sitting down with him, he told me, he says, Keith, if you take this job, you'll be gone in 6 months. He said, our project, our software, next slide, is shrink wrapped. He said, we don't need services. He said, we install our software and the clients run with it. We do a little bit of training and everybody's happy. He says, all your integration services, all the other things you're talking about, we don't need. So I got by that interview. The other people were a little bit more optimistic than he was. I ended up taking the job. And within a few weeks after I took the job, my boss said, I want you to sit down with all the product salespeople and tell them about the services we're going to be selling to our customers. So I sat down, I did my presentation. My boss said, okay, you guys, any questions for Keith? Salesman on the front row raised his hand. And he said, yeah, where's the beef? He said, we can't sell that stuff. Our product is shrink wrapped. He said, our clients don't need services. And all that stuff about data management, integration, they don't know what you're talking about. We can't sell that. And to add insult to injury, I get out of that meeting, and all the people that are building the software and maintaining the software, they're telling me, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. They're perfectly happy. We're perfectly happy. We're very successful. We got the best software in the industry. Why do we need services? Just go away, leave us alone. Well, I was in a little bit of dilemma, and I wasn't really sure what to do. And then all of a sudden, I got a revelation. A few weeks later, I was interviewing a woman to be and that's not a picture of her, that's just one I threw in. But I was interviewing a woman to be my director of my Canadian operations. And during the interview, she says, Keith, tell me about your vision. Tell me about what you're going to be doing in this services business. And I explained it to her, and she looked at me and she says, you don't get it, do you? And I said, well, of course I do. I'm the vice president. Naturally I get it. She says, no, you don't. She had been the manager of a data processing center that oversaw the software that we sold for the company she was working for. And I said, okay, if I don't get it, explain to me what I don't get. And she says, have you ever used Excel? I said, oh yeah, I use it all the time. I do budgets on it, and I do staffing, and I use it frequently. Yeah. She says, how much of the functionality do you understand? I says, what, 10%? That gets me by. That gets me by. She says, would you be more productive if you were proficient in 40 to 50% of the functionality of Excel spreadsheets? I said, oh yeah. I said, I've sat next to people they can get done in 5 minutes what it takes me an hour to do. And the stuff they can do is just amazing. She said, Keith, your software is the same way. She says, except rather than doing budgets and staffing, we're looking for oil and gas. Now think about it. If our geologists and geophysicists that are using your software can get done half the time, a quarter of the time, what it's now taken them, what that does to our bottom line, how long it's going to take, how quickly we can find oil and gas, and how accurately we can find oil and gas. That's where your value is. So I really took that to heart. I obviously didn't understand. A few weeks go by. I'm in a session, and I've got a lot of our trainers and our pre-sales technical people that work with the salespeople. And hold on to this slide for a minute. Don't go to the next one until I tell you. And as we're going around the room and we're talking about services and enhancing our services, I ask, is there anybody that's got a success story that they can share with us? And this one young woman named Claudia from Venezuela says, yeah, I've got a success story. I said, well, go ahead, tell us a story. She says, well, a large company in Venezuela, and this is before Venezuela took over all the oil companies. She says, a large company came to us and they bought several of our software products because they were getting ready to do a drilling program in the Gulf of Mexico. And she said, so I did a training session for the people that were going to be using the software to help find the best place to drill for the oil and gas. And she said, after I finished the training session, they came to me and they said, could you be with us? We're going to drill 10 wells in the next 45 days. And can you be with us during that 45 days? Your software is very complex, but work side by side with our people as we do the analysis and determine where to drill those wells. So she went to her manager. Manager says, yeah, sure. They arranged for a fee arrangement. And so she worked with that team. I said, okay, Claudia, what's a success story? She said, well, we finished the drilling program in 30 days. I said, wow, 30 days? That's amazing. So tell us, what value was that? And she looked at me and she said, well, we saved them 15 days. I said, no. Really, what was the value? She says, we saved them 15 days. Next slide. I said, well, wait a minute. What does an oil rig in the Gulf of Mexico cost? And at that time, it was $120,000 a day. So we saved them 15 days. So we actually saved them $1.8 million. And she said, but that's not all. Next slide. She says, that's not the whole story. I said, well, what's the whole story? Next slide. Well, she said they normally had completed successfully 4 wells out of 10, meaning 4 of the 10 wells they drilled would produce oil and gas, and the other 6 were dry holes. She said, when we did this particular program, we successfully completed 8 out of 10 wells in 30 days. We did the math real quick, and that was an additional $5.4 million. So I immediately asked Claudia, I said, how much did we charge them for your services, Claudia? Next slide. $18,000. So everybody said, what's the return on investment for that $18,000? And I asked them, how many of you would invest $18,000 to get $6, $7, $8 million in return? So that got us into a discussion with them and the rest of the product salespeople about what value we delivered. and to look at your customers and say, are we saving them costs, overhead, administrative, per unit costs, operating costs, sales expenses? And then also look at the time we save them and quantify how much that means to the bottom line. Time associated with delays, cycle time, response time, overtime, all those different factors have a dollar value associated with them. And so as we go forward, let's understand how we're adding value through the services we offer. The products are obviously offering value, but through the services we offer, we're really saving them a tremendous amount of money. And I realize the oil industry is a little exceptional because of the numbers they're dealing with, but it's still something that I found, a lot of our salespeople, the product salespeople, didn't understand a lot of this stuff. And it was truly amazing. Next slide. So the rest of the story. So we're moving along. We're finding this information. We're getting really excited about the value we can deliver and the services. Then I get a call, and I'll go to the next slide here. And let's hold this slide for a second. Here's where a garage full of Ferraris comes in, Tab. I get a call from that same salesman that said, where's the beef? And he says, Keith, I just had a very, very disappointing meeting with a client. He says, it's my biggest customer in Canada. He says, a big oil company. And he said, I went in to sell the senior vice president of exploration the next whiz-bang piece of software we had. And he told me he's not buying another piece of software from us. And that's 90% of my commission, Keith. They're 90% of my sales. He said he's not buying any more software. I said, did he say why? And he said, well, yeah, he said he wasn't getting the value out of the software. And when I asked him to explain further, he just said, look, I've got a garage full of Ferraris and I don't have a driver's license. Meaning he had the most expensive software in the market, but he wasn't getting any return on investment. His people really didn't know how to use that software to drive the value they wanted. Next slide. And the salesman was still a little bit confused. And so he says, the executive says to him, look, exploration costs here in Canada are $20 a barrel. He says, your software is not helping us reduce that cost, and it should be. Our exploration teams are probably only using 10% of that functionality. Let's go back to the Excel spreadsheets. And he says, we need to get them much more proficient. We need more training. We need your people working beside us to help us get the value out of this greatest software that you're selling. Next slide. So that we signed a contract about 6 weeks later for $8 million per year for 3 years to provide people to work with them to help them get the value out of that software, to find more oil and gas at a lower cost, basically. Well, obviously, a win like that sparked interest in the rest of the organization. So we spread these success stories throughout the organization. We made sure the trainers and the support people knew of the value. So when they saw opportunities, they could feed that to the product salespeople who could call us in, and we could talk about services we could have to really enhance it. And then we even got our customers to go to trade shows and talk about what we had done to enhance their value and help them be much more efficient and drive more money to the bottom line. Next slide. So over that course of time, our annual services revenue increased 450% in less than 3 years. And a real kicker, next slide, that sales vice president that told me I wasn't going to last 6 months was fired 6 months later after I started work. So things kind of fell together. All of that basically gets down again to those three things: innovative thinking, know your value, and build the relationships. And then dance in the end zone. And that kind of sums it up, Tab.
I want to see you dance. No. So
Football injuries prevent that.
oh, heck. Well, thank you. We got some questions here. Let's do Chris's first. Chris would like to know, you spoke about how you succeeded going against what the company typically did. How do you manage to change a mindset within an organization?
You know, like I said in the example, I went ahead. Yeah, I knew I wasn't going too far out of bounds. But like I said, in England, teaming up with software and hardware vendors was something that nobody had ever done. But I was between a rock and a hard place. And as I started doing it and they started seeing some results, and all of a sudden I was having meetings with some people companies that they'd never had meetings with that were not their audit clients. So they got pretty excited about that. When I was working with that oil field services company and my management told me to, they were going to start pulling people off the project. I tried to convince them not to do anything, and they were going to go ahead and proceed. And I just started calling, and then I came to them and I said, "Hey, I've got a meeting with the other team, and we're going to team up." I said, "Don't pull anybody off the project." And so, having to move pretty quickly, make decisions on the fly, getting results, and being able to communicate back up. Here's what's happening. I'm making progress. Things are moving forward, and that bought me the time. It's not always doesn't always work that easily, but fortunately it did in my case. It just taking action and taking the bull by the horns, so to speak.
And I think sometimes when you get a win, like you did with that $8 million contract, other people start to sit up and take notice. So sometimes you got to get that win in order for that to happen. One of the things that you talked about was getting product salespeople to sell services. And I always find that interesting because a lot of times product salespeople don't want to sell services or vice versa. Yeah. And companies either need to cross that chasm or really divide it up and have two different sales. So when you talk about getting that win, because a salesperson is in that example is motivated by one thing, and if you're standing in between that one thing, then you're going to get resistance. As soon as you show them that you can increase that one thing, that resistance goes away. So I think it's the same thing in a situation like that. Is you change a mindset by showing value, by making something. So I appreciate that. Next question, Harold. Innovative thinking. Is there a regular routine or process you go through?
I don't know that there's a regular routine or process. I think, the reason I had that slide of that little kid looking between his legs, kind of upside down thinking, is just try to think about it from a different perspective. And, you tend to, we all fall in a rut. We all fall into a routine of thinking a certain way or following a certain process. And I try to challenge that. And I say, okay, this is the way I've always done it. Is that the right way to do it? And bringing other people into the equation, other people with a different point of view. A lot of times you argue with those people, but listening to them and trying to listen to what they have to say and then factor that into your thinking. I've often welcomed people to come in. Some managers, some people will shut them up. I usually welcome people in the room and say, okay, yeah, let's look at it a different way, because again, I get between a rock and a hard place, and you've got to start being a little bit more creative and opening your mind to a whole different way of thinking of things. So there's not a particular process, just trying to open your mind and say, there's probably a different way. Let's look at a different approach.
And I like that, open your mind and thinking about a different approach. You'll probably appreciate this. Things have changed. Back in late 80s when I first started, early 90s in my career, one of the things I was taught was to hate my competitors. You just hate your competitors, and that was drilled so much into me that when I left,
You too.
it was drilled in. Yeah, I mean, that was drilled into all of us. When you leave, what happens? Well, where do I go? I hate those guys. That's how I was, that's how I was brought up. So the innovative, that treasonous, as you said, that innovative, maybe our competition could be a partner, and maybe we could grow together, and maybe we could do things together that we don't do. And it becomes that outside thinking that allows us to grow. And it was Jason Campbell that talked about prior to Anita was talking about just clearing your mind, and about when you go into thinking time. And thinking time is something that I absolutely believe in. But to me, that's where you start getting that innovative thinking, and maybe that's crazy. Innovative thinking comes from set aside thought time, right? And so I appreciate that. Next question. This is from Grace. How do you quantify value with a feature or benefit that is hard to tie directly to dollars? That's a great question.
Yeah, well, like I said, a lot of times there's not a direct cost, but we actually, after I went through that exercise with the Venezuela and the Gulf of Mexico, we actually brought in a consulting firm, and they had a process where they taught us taught us and our people to take the cycle time of your customer and to say, okay, here's how they produce their money. Now, where do we intervene in that process? And, I mentioned cycle time a couple of times, but, if it takes them 30 days to produce a project or deliver a service, can we speed that up? And if we speed that up, then maybe we can get them to get twice around that track in 30 days. Well, that automatically doubles their revenue. And so we would take our customers and we'd say, okay, here's the process they go through to generate their revenue, to sell their products or deliver their services. How can we impact that process, and how can we shorten that process? And that usually equates into dollars. So it may not be actually hard cash that you can look at and say, okay, we cut their costs because we sell it, that product is cheaper or something like that. But look at that time, look at that cycle time, look at the overtime. If we can cut their overtime, if we can, cut that time out, that's going to tie into dollars. So that's the other big factor. And a lot of times people don't look at that. They look more at the hard, cash out the door, cash in the door. But a lot of times, like I say, when you look at that time factor, and there's so many aspects to it, that's what we always did, and it always turned into fairly significant.
When you were talking about the, I think her name was Claudia. Was that
Claudia?
it?
Yeah.
Man, I can't believe I actually remembered her name. a little star for me. In Venezuela, when she went through that process of a win, and you had to drag that out of her, right? You had to. I mean, that was that quantifying. It's like, how much was it? It was 15 days. How much was it? It was 15 days. And there wasn't a dollar amount associated with it. And getting down to, I think the number is like 7.3 million total. Yeah. And then I have to believe that when you say 7.3 million is what we saved them, how much did we charge them? $18,000. I have to believe in that situation there was a lot of, oh crap. Did we just really do that for $18,000? And I think I think whenever you quantify something, or whenever you get that, you have to have that epiphany, or that oh crap moment for people in order for it to start to sink in.
And like I said too, even with the simple example with the Excel spreadsheet, I had sat next to people that could they could do in 5 minutes what it took me an hour to do, and I thought, I'm wasting an hour doing that. And if I were just a little bit more proficient, I could do it in 5 minutes. I mean, and it kind of brought everything together for me.
Yeah. Well, Keith, I appreciate the time. We're down to our last minute. Thank you so much for being here with us. And as always, I appreciate you. and grateful that you took the time for us here at Refiners.
Thanks for an opportunity, Tab. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Welcome to Refiners. Refiners is an organization of business owners and business professionals that are looking to improve their business and personal performance, just like you. As a Refiners member, you will have the opportunity to build connections with like-minded individuals from your industry. Join our amazing community for free at refiners.io.